What does it cost to go to Antarctica? You might not like the answer. To set foot on the continent, those expeditions can begin in the $10,000 a person range. But don't worry, you have options, and we're breaking it all down for your Antarctica bucket list trip.
We've run numbers on cruises for years, what it costs per day, what it costs for the whole voyage, and all of that work, none of that applies when you're talking about the calculus for an Antarctica trip. Now, you can certainly get on a voyage for less than $2,000 a person. However, that comes with a massive catch. Today, we're breaking down the options on choosing your Antarctic voyage, the brutal truth about pricing, the potential hidden fees on those bucket list activities for your once-in-a-lifetime adventure.
The number one decision you need to make when booking your bucket list Antarctic adventure is, do you want to set foot on the continent of Antarctica?
The grand majority of people take a cruise there. And as Kara mentioned, there's two options. You have the standard mass market cruise ships, Princess and NCL and Celebrity. These are good sized ships. They go down to the continent and they essentially do a drive-by. Wave at the continent.
Yeah.
How's it going?
You see it from inside the ship, you look over at the land, but you never set your feet on the continent of Antarctica. You don't get off the ship anywhere near there.
Right. They have strict limits on the continent about how many people can be on land at any one time. And for a ship of that size, there's just no practical way to cycle everybody through to be able to put them on land. So they just don't do it. They just, you get to see the site, you get to see the sea and smell the air, and you can see the continent, but you just don't get to get off. So that's the cheapest way to do it. And I think, we've seen those, especially last minute, those drop well below 2,000 if those ships aren't sailing full to be able to take those cruises. Now, they also have to count the flights to South America, but the cruise itself can be very inexpensive to do those. But again, it's whether or not you actually want to, plant your feet onto the continent.
Yeah. So then the other option, if you don't just do a drive-by on an 8,000 person ship, the other option is an expedition ship. And those are the types of ships that are much smaller. Think like 200 passengers. But it's also much more expensive because there's a lot of staff involved in getting everyone safely off the ship into inflatable Zodiac boats onto the continent. There's a lot of scientific education to it. And you get your feet planted on the continent of Antarctica. These are much more expensive, but it is a much more immersive experience. And it's the only way to be on land.
Right. And I think a lot of the cost too involved is, as Kara mentioned, these ships are typically 200 people or less. Some of them are 100 or less. Some of them are 50 or less if you really get the small lines. And you just you're paying all that extra overhead that normally all the passengers sort of, chip in together to cover the gas for the ship and the food. You're paying for all that in a very small group.
Yeah.
So these cruises are going to start almost always at around $10,000 minimum. And I think
per person.
Right. Per person. And some of those include flights, some do not. You kind of price it out, but just kind of think in your head, it's going to cost you at least $10,000 to even start this game to be able to do this. So they are much more expensive, but they typically are on nicer cruise lines or more of a luxury experience. So you're going to get more for your money as well. But it is a significant cost.
So that's your number one decision. Do you want to do a drive-by or do you want to actually stand on the continent of Antarctica?
Right.
There's your number one choice. Number two, a very big consideration that you need to take into account is the timing of these trips. So most of these Antarctic cruises will go out of the tip of South America, which is either Ushuaia, Argentina, or Puerto Williams, Chile. They're effectively across a bay from each other, but that's the tip of South America. After the ship leaves the tip of South America, it takes 2 days to go across the Drake Passage to get to Antarctica. So that is 2 days there and 2 days back, and then whatever time you're going around the continent. Most of these cruises are minimum 10 days long.
Right. And they basically build a buffer into there. As Kara said, it takes at least 2 days to cross the Drake. If the weather's really bad, that might push 3, but usually it's a day and a half or 2. So you've got 4, maybe 5 days of just transit to the continent. And then they give you 4 or 5 days for hopefully weather delays to try to make sure you get at least one landing. Now that's something else you need to understand. You might do this 10-day Antarctica cruise and not actually step foot on the continent. Those aren't guaranteed. You know, when you spend this $10,000 per person, they're going to do everything they can to put you on the continent. They really do. They move the ship around, they reorganize things, they do different times, but sometimes the weather just doesn't cooperate. So just understand that if you do a 10-day voyage, they're giving you 4 or 5 days to try to get those landings in. That's kind of why they had those built like that. So those cruises are going to be at least a 10-day attempt. So you got to have a little bit of time when you're planning these.
And when you look at these itineraries, you need to see where you're landing, because some of these will focus exclusively, as Gary said, on Antarctica and the peninsula, so that they can have options to get you, if you're paying for one of the ones where you set foot on the continent, many opportunities to get you there.
So understand too that when you look at your itinerary for these ships and you go to the websites, they're going to have a list of places you're going to stop. Understand those are nominal. That you might stop in those places. You might stop in those places on that day. You might stop in those on another day. You might go to none of those, because again, everything is weather dependent when you do these, and they try to get you to land somewhere. And sometimes the place that you're planned completely just not available. The other thing you have to look at, sometimes you'll see these voyages or maybe a 14-day cruise. And those 14-day cruises, if it's not from South America to Antarctica directly, you're probably adding the Falklands or South Georgia in there. And if you're doing that, those are nowhere near the continent. So you're essentially going to be on that ship zipping around the ocean and not spending a lot of time on the continent itself. So be careful when you look at those voyages. If you really want to see the Falklands and South Georgia and have a good chance at Antarctica, you're probably looking at like an 18 or a 20-day cruise to be able to do that effectively. Just understand, when you look at those itineraries, if you see a 14-day and it doesn't just go to the continent, you're probably going to be spending an awful lot of time with sea days on the ocean.
So also check the itineraries and the cruise planning that you're looking at for the logistics involved. Does this include your flights to South America? Does this include any hotels whenever you do the transition of the flights? Do you stay, for example, in Santiago, Chile? Do they fly you down? Because if not, just know you need to account for flights to the very tip of South America, which are not cheap, and a lot of the cruise lines charter because they're not cheap or not available, and hotels if you have to stay along the way, because you never, no matter what kind of cruise it is, never fly in the day of.
So when you're booking these cruises and you have booked one of the expedition cruises, the smaller ships that you know is going to have a landing on the continent, included in that price, obviously your landings, assuming they can get you there. You're also normally going to get things like Zodiac rides. So they're going to put those small boats in the water. They're going to put you in small groups, 5 to 10 people, and they're going to, go off of the ship. You're going to go look at icebergs. You're going to look at wildlife. You can get close to the continent and kind of see it from there. So those are included in there. A lot of the cruise lines include kayaking, as part of that too. If you want to get out in a kayak and go in single or double kayaks, those are usually included. But there are other things that you can normally add on. And a big, for example of that is some of the cruise lines allow you to camp on the continent itself, which would be super cool. But they treat it as an excursion and you have to pay extra for it. Some of those lines, it's $100. Some of them, it's $300. Some of them, it's $1,000, depending on sort of what the infrastructure they're doing. But they, provide you the gear, the sleeping bags and the situation for while you're on the continent, and they leave and you sleep there overnight. But understand, if you want to do an experience like that, it's going to cost you a little bit of money in addition to this $10,000 per person, that you've already paid for.
Minimum.
So some of the lines that do this stuff, things like Ocean Wide and Quark, those are more the adventure focus. So those are the ones that are probably going to get you, maybe like a stand-up paddleboard, or they're going to have the camping adventures, or they're going to have, more of a hiking on the continent. Those lines tend to be the people who are a little more adventurous and, want to get out and do some of the things. Those are great. Usually going to be really small ships. Again, the pricing is just going to kind of vary what you're looking for, how long the voyage is. But, those are some lines that you can certainly consider. There's some luxury lines, that do this as well.
There are also some ultra luxury lines that repurpose some of their ships to be expedition ships. And that includes Silversea, which is part of the Royal Caribbean group, actually. Seabourn and Scenic, which is another ultra luxury line, as well as Abercrombie and Kent, which is very well known for their expeditions as well.
Right. They do a lot of tours, and they use another cruise lines ships, but they build it out. So these are going to be really luxurious experiences. You're still going to get the landings on these expedition cruises. You're still going to get the Zodiac experiences, but you may not get the things like camping or some of the more adventurous things. It's going to be a highly luxurious cruise, great food, really good entertainment, good staff taking care of you while you're on the continent, but maybe not some of those adventurous items.
And again, what we talked about, those previous two categories were really the on-continent adventures. But if you're looking for that more affordable, shorter drive-by type of scenario, most of the mass market, maybe the next level up of the mass market cruises goes Celebrity being the level up from Royal Caribbean, Princess being the level up from Carnival. Lines like that will go down and do the drive-bys. You don't get to set foot, but it's still an option to see it and see the wildlife.
All right. So the next thing you have to consider when you're going to do these, and I would say for the most part, you're all going to be in the first category, but I'm going to talk about the second category as an option. So when Kara mentioned that the ships leave the tip of South America, they go to the very tip of Antarctica. And if you look at the continent of Antarctica, there's actually like a peninsula that kind of sticks straight off the continent. It goes directly north. The ships make it to that little peninsula, and then they kind of bounce around it and stop at different places along there or islands along there. And that's where you're actually going to see the continent. If you're talking about the continent mass, normally you're not going to be anywhere near that because it's just too far down. Okay. So when you see those things, though, in that little tip, you're going to see things like seals and penguin colonies and tons of Arctic birds and, just whales, all kinds of great wildlife that you're going to see all in that area. The other option you can do, though, is if you look at a map and you look and you go below the 66th parallel and you basically get, to that very southern part of the world, you're going to see a different part of Antarctica, and you're going to see shifting sea ice. You're going to see much bigger glaciers. You're going to have the sun being, up the entire day. You're going to see much less wildlife, but more sort of raw Antarctica because you're significantly farther south and you're in a much more, I wouldn't say dangerous, but you're in a much more austere environment. Thank you. So, you have an option. So when you look at these cruises, there are cruises that they call out the fact that they go below that 66th parallel. But understand, those are actually going to be long cruises. Those are going to be at least 14 days because now you've got to add that additional time to not only get to the continent, but then to get, farther south and push yourself past that point to be able to see the other parts of Antarctica. So if you want to do that, that's great. Those cruises are going to be a little longer, and they're definitely going to be more expensive because now you're on the ship longer. So, not the $10,000 price that we quoted is typically those basic ones, the 10-day cruise that gets you to the continent and back. If you want to add additional things onto this, you can probably add another $5,000 or $10,000 per person to get to that point. But if you want to see the far ends of the earth, it is certainly an option to you.
Another big piece of information you need to consider is the timing for these cruises. Because Antarctica is in the southern hemisphere, and I'm sure you know this, but the summer in the southern hemisphere is pretty much around January. So that is the only time when Antarctica is accessible and any of the wildlife is there. Otherwise, ships can't get through because it's their winter and it's too full of ice, too full of snow, and you're not going to see any animals anyway. So be prepared that any of these cruises are really going to go from October to March.
Right. And, you're talking about the seasons for these things. If you've heard of shoulder season in, European countries, you go to Rome and in May instead of going in June or July, so you can have a little bit of less crowds. There's a shoulder season for Antarctica as well. And it's on both ends. So, as Kara mentioned, the season kind of opens up in October. That's based on the fact, again, the ice has finally melted. It's out of their winter. The ice is melting a little bit. The ships can finally get through. So if you go in October and November, that is going to be the shoulder season. It is going to be cheaper. So you actually have potential for breaking that $10,000 barrier, getting a little cheaper. Maybe you get it for $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, depending on what the cruise lines do and how full it is. But understand, you're going to have a trade-off there. You're not going to see as much wildlife. The penguins haven't mated yet. So you're going to see the adult penguins, and maybe they're going to be a little standoffish. You're not going to be able to get to everywhere because the sea ice hasn't broken up everywhere. However, you are probably going to see some really beautiful vistas because there still might be snow and ice all over all the ground. So there's a trade-off in there. You're going to see different things in October and November than you're going to see in December and January, which happen to be
peak season.
Peak season, right. With peak season comes peak pricing.
Truly. Yeah, December and January is the peak season. It is the peak of summer in Antarctica. And when we say summer, though, it's still about 30 degrees Fahrenheit for a high, but that's opposed to negative 30 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
So summer is still, it's still cold. Don't get me wrong.
You know, in December, January now, so now you're into their peak summer. You have tons of daylight. You know, it might be daylight 20 hours a day. You're going to have a ton of penguins because they're out, they've mated. You're going to have the babies, they're little fluffy guys and they run around, they're great. You can get reasonably close to them. So that's a really great experience. You're going to see all the seals that are now coming out because, you know, they're coming out into summer and they can now hunt again. So this is a great time to go. However, demand is the highest. So if you're going to do these, you probably need to book a little earlier and you're not going to see any pricing breaks. You know, when you're talking about what it's going to cost you to go and you see those big numbers where people are paying $20,000, $30,000, $35,000 to go, they probably went during peak season.
Yeah.
But you know, if you're going to go, maybe it's a bucket list item and you're only going to go once, maybe you go during peak season.
So again, after that summer peak, the next shoulder season before it completely closes down is February and March.
Yeah, so this is a great time to go as well. Again, it's a little different. You're going to have different landscapes because a lot of the snow has melted. So now you're going to see more of the rocks and sort of the ruggedness of the continent. There's still going to be ice and snow, but it's going to be significantly less than it was in the October, November, and December, January timeframe. You're going to have a whole bunch of the baby penguins that are out there still. You know, maybe some of them have migrated off, but you're still going to see quite a bit of wildlife. This is a great time to see whale watching. That's sort of when the whales come back out. So if you're really into whales, that might be the time frame that you want to go. So these landscapes, these 2-month chunks that sort of go for Antarctica change significantly the experience that you're going to have. It's still a fantastic continent. It's still going to have amazing views and amazing wildlife, but each one's going to be a little bit different for the time frame. And again, that second shoulder season, you're going to see those prices come back down again into later February and into March because, you know, the cruise lines know the experience isn't a peak experience. They can't charge peak prices for it. So, you know, if you really just want to go at the very cheapest you could possibly go and set foot on the continent, then pick one of those end, you know, October or March dates. If you can afford it and you really want the peak experience, pick something in December or January and know you're going to get, you know, the best of both worlds.
Yeah. So what do you think? If you go to Antarctica, what do you want to do? Do you want to set foot on the continent or do you want to do a drive-by with the different price points? What are your thoughts? Let us know.
Thanks for watching.
Happy cruising.
Bottom of the bottom. Count of 3, 2, 1, go!